Published in 1993, Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower is a visionary dystopian novel that merges speculative fiction with urgent social commentary. Set in a collapsing America in the year 2024, it tells the story of Lauren Olamina, a young African-American girl who possesses a rare condition called hyperempathy, the ability to feel others' pain as her own. As society disintegrates into chaos due to climate change, economic collapse, racial violence, and corporate exploitation, Lauren develops a philosophical and spiritual movement called Earthseed. Butler uses this apocalyptic backdrop to explore themes of adaptability, community, survival, religion, capitalism, race, gender, and the dangerous inertia of the status quo. At once a coming-of-age story and a prophetic critique of American society, Parable of the Sower is among Butler's most powerful and prescient works. Setting the stage: America in ruin. The novel begins in Robledo, California, in 2024. The United States has become a failed state, devastated by climate change, corporate privatization, and social decay. Clean water is expensive, gasoline is rare, public schools and police protection are almost non-existent, and the government is a hollow shell. The middle and lower classes live in walled communities, trying to keep out roving gangs, thieves, and drug addicts. One such drug, pyro, induces arousal from watching fire, leading to widespread arson. The environment is marked by drought, extreme poverty, and militarized survivalism. Lauren Olamina and hyperempathy. Lauren Olamina, the 15-year-old narrator, lives in a gated neighborhood with her family. Her father is a Baptist minister and community leader, advocating faith and order amidst chaos. Lauren, however, has already begun to lose faith in Christianity. She suffers from hyperempathy syndrome, caused by her mother's drug use during pregnancy. This condition causes Lauren to physically experience the pain or pleasure of those around her. In a world rife with violence, this trait becomes both a burden and a tool, a metaphor for compassion and vulnerability. Lauren is intellectually advanced, observant, and visionary. She keeps a secret journal in which she formulates the tenets of a new belief system she calls Earthseed, based on the principle that God is change. Earthseed, a new faith for a broken world. Lauren's emerging religion revolves around the concept that the only constant is change, and that humanity's destiny is to shape change and ultimately travel beyond Earth. The destiny: take root among the stars. Earthseed promotes personal responsibility, adaptability, and community. While her family and others cling to old religions and systems that no longer serve them, Lauren sees adaptation and evolution as the only path forward. Collapse of the community. Despite their precautions, the Robledo community is not safe. Crime, scarcity, and desperation intensify. Lauren prepares a go bag, practices survival skills, and warns others of inevitable collapse. Tragedy strikes when her father disappears and is presumed dead. Later, Robledo is attacked by pyro-addicted arsonists, who destroy the community. Lauren's home is burned, and her family is killed. She escapes with a few possessions and sets out northward on foot, heading toward Oregon in search of a better life. The journey north and the formation of Earthseed. Lauren travels disguised as a man to avoid sexual assault. She encounters others on the road, including Zara and Harry, fellow survivors from Robledo. Bankole, an older black doctor heading to his land in Northern California. Along the way, they endure violence, hunger, wild dogs, and death. Lauren saves lives, defends the group, and shares Earthseed's teachings. Gradually, others begin to accept and adopt her ideas, drawn to her strength, empathy, and vision. By the time the group reaches Bankole's land, which they find burned and abandoned, they decide to settle there and found the first Earthseed community, Acorn. Character analysis. Lauren Olamina. Lauren is one of the most compelling protagonists in dystopian literature. Intelligent, spiritual, and pragmatic, she embodies the qualities of a leader and prophet. Her hyperempathy becomes a metaphor for emotional intelligence in a brutal world. Her Earthseed philosophy stems from both her rational mind and spiritual yearning, fusing science fiction with theology. Unlike many dystopian protagonists, Lauren is not just reacting to collapse, she's proactively shaping a new future. Bankole is a wise and caring doctor, 57 years old, who becomes Lauren's lover and eventual partner in building Acorn. Though initially skeptical of Earthseed, he is drawn to Lauren's conviction. His medical knowledge, land ownership, and life experience provide stability and resources to the group. Their relationship is complex, marked by love, mutual respect, but also generational and ideological tension. Zara Moss. Zara is a young black woman who grew up in an abusive polygamous household. Hardened and resourceful, she develops a deep respect for Lauren and becomes one of Earthseed's first followers. Zara's growth throughout the novel reflects the potential for healing and trust in a fractured world. Harry Balter. Harry, a white teenager from Robledo, initially embodies the sheltered, naive survivor. He struggles with the realities of violence and hierarchy on the road. Over time, however, he learns to adapt and becomes an active member of the new community. Keith Olamina. Lauren's younger brother, Keith, runs away from Robledo early in the novel and returns later as a hardened criminal. His arc represents the consequences of abandonment, survivalism without morality, and toxic masculinity. He eventually dies violently, serving as a contrast to Lauren's path of compassionate leadership. Themes and analysis. 1. Change as divine and inevitability. The central theological concept of Earthseed, God is change, recurs throughout the novel. It challenges traditional views of a static, omnipotent deity by suggesting that divinity is dynamic and mutable. For Lauren, accepting change is not just a survival tactic, it's a sacred imperative. Butler reframes faith not as submission to an unchanging power, but as an active engagement with reality, placing agency and adaptability at the core of belief. 2. Survival and community. The novel is a survival narrative, but survival is never depicted as a solitary effort. Lauren's survival depends on forming bonds, building trust, and fostering mutual dependence. As the characters travel, they form a mobile, evolving family, highlighting the necessity of communal resilience. Butler critiques the hyper-individualism of dystopian survival tropes by insisting that salvation lies in connection. 3. Race, class, and inequality. Racism and classism remain central forces in this future. The most vulnerable people, poor people of color, are the ones suffering most in this collapsed America. Slavery, debt servitude, and exploitation return in new forms, such as company towns where workers are essentially enslaved. Lauren, as a black woman, must navigate racism, sexism, and violence while attempting to create something new. Butler's America is a direct extrapolation of 20th-century racial and economic injustice, suggesting that systemic oppression persists even amid apocalypse. 4. Religion and ideology. Butler interrogates the role of religion in times of crisis. While Lauren's father clings to traditional Baptist teachings, Lauren finds them inadequate for the world she inhabits. Earthseed emerges as both a critique and reimagining of faith, a religion rooted in empirical reality, human agency, and a cosmic vision of the future. This spiritual movement is not just a means of solace but a blueprint for action, a religion as ideology, narrative, and guide. 5. Empathy and pain. Lauren's hyperempathy condition is both literal and metaphorical. It makes her physically vulnerable, yet spiritually attuned. In a world numb to suffering, Lauren feels everything. This condition becomes a moral compass, emphasizing that feeling others' pain is not weakness but a path to deeper understanding. Hyperempathy echoes Butler's broader argument that only by acknowledging the suffering of others can we build a better society. 6. Collapse and complacency. Throughout the novel, people cling to failing systems, religion, capitalism, law enforcement, hoping they will return to normal. Butler critiques this nostalgia and complacency, suggesting that denial of change is a fatal error. Those who adapt survive. Those who don't perish. Lauren's Earthseed is a response to this paralysis, a call to conscious evolution. Style and structure. The novel is structured as a series of journal entries from Lauren's point of view, lending it an intimate and confessional tone. The entries are interspersed with verses from Earthseed, reflecting Lauren's evolving theology. Butler's prose is clear, precise, and emotionally grounded, often understated in its presentation of horror. The first-person narrative draws readers deeply into Lauren's psyche. By filtering the dystopia through her reflections, the novel becomes not just a story of disaster, but a testament of hope and intention. Butler's vision and contemporary relevance. Although written in 1993, Parable of the Sower is eerily prescient. The novel predicts environmental collapse and wildfires, corporate control of labor and privatized cities, mass migration and border militarization, gun violence and breakdown of civil order, charismatic young people creating online followings for new ideologies. Butler's foresight is not magical. It stems from her acute analysis of socioeconomic trends, climate degradation, and institutional racism. The novel speaks directly to 21st-century crises, from climate change to inequality to cultural fragmentation, making it a critical text for readers seeking meaning and strategy in troubled times. Conclusion. Parable of the Sower is more than a dystopian novel. It is a call to consciousness. Through Lauren Olamina, Octavia Butler constructs a blueprint for survival that demands empathy, adaptability, and imagination. Earthseed is both a religion and a metaphor for the kind of radical future building necessary in times of collapse. Butler refuses the comfort of easy endings or heroic victories. Instead, she offers a path of responsibility, one where each person is a shaper of change. In Lauren, we find a prophet not of doom, but of possibility. Her journey reminds us that even in the darkest moments, we can choose to plant seeds of a different world.